Hello, thanks Martin. Thanks very much for coming down to see me. My name's Peter Fordham from DHA Designs in London. So I'm an independent lighting designer. So Martin, where do I start?
Sorry, didn't give you the intro, did I?
No, that's fine there. So I'm going to talk to you today very briefly, slightly tongue-in-cheek, about tunnel vision, how to manage your clients' expectations on a diminishing budget. I'm going to tell you what to do when a client wants something like this, but the reality is all they can afford is this. My journey starts at Gatwick Airport, at the Sky Bridge installation, and I'm sure many of you have been across this. 2015, there was an amazing sound installation installed across this bridge, playing back sounds from the Yangtze River to completely interactive. It's quite impressive. And last summer, I got a call completely out of the blue from the sound designer who designed it and installed it. Now, the sound designer, looking for a lighting designer. The sound designer had been approached by a brand designer. The brand designer, in turn, is working for a developer. The CEO of the development company had seen and loved the Skybridge sound installation, and they wanted to incorporate something like that as an immersive environment with lighting for a new project of theirs, which was a rather prestigious development in the centre of London, including 3 pedestrian tunnels, which they wanted to combine the combination of sound and light. Quite a challenge. So just to complete the jigsaw, the lighting designer was introduced to the brand designer. Now, the brand designer at that stage had already come up with some concepts for the developer. And when they shared them with us, it was pretty exciting, really. They were showing some really amazing images of dynamic, kinetic lighting environments, really immersive, high-end, and what we thought was high budget. They also referred to this project, which is the Place Plaza in Beijing, which is quite old. It's a huge high-resolution video screen that stretches across the shopping center in the Beijing area. So seeing these images as concept, I was quite excited to do something like this right in the center of London. At the beginning of a project and with a new client, this is my first question: what's the lighting budget? And this is the response I got. Okay, I get a response like that, followed by this: it's all about the lighting, and I get a blank response and a sharp intake of breath, because I don't know about you lot, but I hear this quite a lot, and sometimes it's not the best start to a project, as I'll explain. This is the site, and this is really central. On this corner here is Knightsbridge Tube Station. Really amazing. So the whole centre was being developed over a period of 3 years, and the tunnels wrap around Brompton Road and Sloane Street. Really quite exciting, I thought. And we were getting lined up for what was going to be an amazing project. But in reality, those tunnels actually turned out to be this. It's a hoarding. And it's an enclosed hoarding, or partial hoarding, but it's public. But unlike that place in Beijing, the ceiling's only less than 2.5 meters tall. All right, okay, so I went back and said, are you sure there's no specific lighting budget as such? And the response was, well, how much is it going to cost? Okay, well, we can do that with our friends in the industry. We can cost the schemes. So we gave them 3 options at first. The first was the high-resolution scheme. We knew this was going to be far too much for them. But nevertheless, we suggested that to get the high-resolution video images, you needed a screen of kinds mounted onto the ceiling. We explained the idea of LED pitch and resolution, and that obviously goes up in terms of the cost of the screens. The tighter the pitch, the more expensive the screens, but the better resolution. And we showed them this rather amazing project that's been around for years, with a slightly higher ceiling height than 2.5 meters in Las Vegas. And this was all fitting the bill of how the concept had been delivered. And of course, designed by Dialux, which is always great, showing a rather dull grayscale image on the left and a rather exciting false color rendering that obviously needs some explanation to the clients. But nevertheless, dumbing it down a little bit, we suggested, well, if you can't afford that, more than likely, perhaps we could create our own mesh on the ceiling, where we can have video images still on a lower resolution using strings of light, such as the IW Flex from Philips. And as inspiration, we turned to some fantastic work by Claudia Paz Design, showing more often, it's just the explanation of the resolution of the images that you could get with this. So it's not as strong as a pure video, but it could still be fun. And of course, dumbing it down even further, back to Dialux to show what it would look like in a grayscale space or psychedelic false color image. And then lastly, we suggested, well, if you can't afford that, perhaps we could still create some dynamic and immersive lighting using direct view illumination, using the LED tubes. I nearly gave the game away then. And we suggested, again, the type of resolution, thanks to Claudia Paz Design again, would be a low resolution image, but still creating quite a lot of fun, and you can play with color and patterns that could still be read. And in Dialux, of course, here we go, just to get the reality there in our tunnels. So we then added up the scores and the costs, and no surprise, the LED media screens were completely off the scale, and the media strings, pretty expensive too, over the length of the tunnels that we were looking at, and even the 4-foot LED media tubes on the left were relatively expensive. So when we showed this back to our new client, the response we got was, but all of these are far too expensive. Well, there's no surprise. And they said, what can you achieve for this tiny fraction of coins here? Okay, finally we've got a budget, which is where we like to be at the beginning of our work. Okay, so when we get a budget, we split it, just like this, without going to an electrical contractor to get costs for wiring, etc. If a client gives us a lighting budget, we say that includes the supply cost of the luminaires and the installation. It's a 50-50 split. So for our little budget, we split it in half, and that's how much that we can design to in terms of the fixture costs. So with this amount of money, what can I actually achieve? Oh yes, sorry. The next question was, what do you mean you don't supply the light fixtures? The brand designer hadn't worked with an independent lighting designer before, so we had to go back to square one to explain that we are providing a lighting scheme for them from an electrical contractor to go out and purchase. Another sharp intake of breath. So, what can we afford? We couldn't afford any of these. The LED screens, forget it. LED nodes, no way. Direct view, no chance. In fact, with the budget that we finally had, all we could achieve was a fluorescent batten. All's not lost, because at times like this, I don't know about you lot, but I tend to turn to my lighting heroes for inspiration, and one of them is Dan Flavin. And I don't know if any of you, or I hope most of you are familiar with his work, because it's quite inspiring what this artist can do with very, very simple, low technology. It's a fluorescent tube wrapped in a colored gel, and it really creates a saturated, static environment. So I thought, yeah, okay, all's not lost, I can do this. But what about the sound installation? So I thought, well, if I'm using fluorescent tubes, if you can graphically interpret the sound wave, the pattern you get, the graphic pattern you get with the sound wave, and expand that, my image on the right, I was sort of getting there with the various lengths of fluorescent tubes. And I thought maybe if I arrange my lights on the ceiling to graphically represent the sound wave, it can link in with the sound installation. I thought that was incredibly clever. And on the fixtures, well, with the fluorescence, obviously nothing's going to change. It's just going to be a static color that we can apply to a fluorescent tube. Really low tech. Encapsulite UK have been doing this for a long time and giving deep dyed sleeves with a good choice of colors that will last for the duration of the project. So, with that in mind, it's back to Dialux again, a nice grayscale render to give my client the idea of the patterns that we're creating. This is my sound wave on the ceiling. And then I can apply with a little bit of artistic license, some color, going from pinks through the blues and reds from one end of the spectrum to the other, and a repeated pattern. So nothing changes, you change, you're moving through the space, and the color around you changes. So taking that onto plan, you can see that what I was trying to create here, and this would be a repeated pattern through all of the tunnels. So I felt like I was getting somewhere in homage to Dan Flavin. Good news, the client likes it. Great, I said, and it's on budget. Fantastic. I'm really pleased with that. It was involving the client through this whole design process was the key. So having chosen the colors for them, I was then asked, would it be okay if the client chose the colors, which is fine. It's all part of the design process. It's all part where my value is being added to the project. Oh, and by the way, the sound installation has been cut. So, okay, all right, well, maybe nobody else will notice my lovely graphical representation of the sound wave, but there is going to be no sound. Never mind. Okay, we'll keep it as it is. So, choice of fixture. This is what we went with. The other thing I needed to add was that the project lasts for 3 years only when the actual development takes place. After 3 years, the hoarding's removed and all my lights are removed, so it's relatively temporary. Because it's essentially a construction site, all of the fittings needed to be 110 volts, and because it's public, even though it's in Knightsbridge, they had to be vandal resistant. So with our help from Encapsulite, we chose this fixture, the MTIK10 IP67 impact resistant waterproof fixture, which is attached to the ceiling with a couple of pretty sturdy clips. And we used the satin diffuser and a coloured sleeve inside each of these fixtures. So far, so good. And this is the client's choice of colours. Not radically different from ours, but nevertheless, it's now going from a light orange through the spectrum into purples, into sky blues. And on a plan you can see here, which is, well, the colours don't come out very well, but you get the idea. And then the client asked me, what will it actually look like? So there's only so much Dialux can do. So we turned to an external renderer who can then build a simple model of the fixtures as well, and we can put in the sleeves and get a much more accurate render for the client. So we showed it in daytime, and then slightly more saturated at night. And they were quite happy with this. So with this, the scheme was signed off, and we could get the electrical contractor on board, and everything was going to be ordered, and everything happy. So in reality, a few months later, or weeks later, this is a pretty fast turnaround project. It looked like this on a very rainy night in January this year, and I was actually quite happy with this. A very low-tech solution to a bit of a challenging problem, and the saturation of the colours works incredibly well, I believe. And so here you can see the difference of the blue saturations and the orange saturations as you walk through this space. And I put together a panoramic shot, so the colours are static as you walk through. And when I was down there doing this, it was quite inspiring to have kids taking photographs of each other in the light, and it's now become the rainbow corridor on Instagram. I've got a little video to show you with some sound. So, the moral of this story. So when a client says to you, or a designer, there is no specific lighting budget as such, followed by, it's all about the lighting, don't believe them. It's all about the money. Actually, it's all about the value a lighting designer can give to a project, regardless of the size of the budget. And that's the task that you've got to do to keep our industry alive. Thank you very much.